The new engine looked very smart. Peter Sam watched with interest as one of the big engines shunted the low truck into place. Mr. Hugh was very pleased. "This is Rusty," he told Peter Sam. "Just the engine we need for doing odd jobs." "It's nice to meet you," Rusty smiled. Peter Sam bubbled with excitement. "Welcome to our railway," he whistled. Rusty was soon on the rails and being inspected by Mr. Hugh and the workmen, who were all impressed. "Come along, Rusty," smiled Mr. Hugh at last. "You can show us your paces." So the little diesel trundled happily up and down the wharf. Nearby passengers and a rather inquisitive Henry watched with interest. Sir Handel, however, sulked at the nearby water column. "What's all this?" he sniffed. "When we were told we'd be getting help, I was expecting a proper engine, not a little shoebox." "Our Rusty's as proper as you," replied Mr. Hugh with a dismissive wave. "I reckon we ought to give you a proper run, Rusty. You can take the next train up to the quarry. Let Sir Handel have the afternoon off." Rusty was excited, and Sir Handel was suddenly more cheerful. "It is a mercy to have some extra wheels around," he mused, to Rusty's amusement. Rusty soon had a line of trucks shunted and stood happily. Peter Sam was due up the line first with the afternoon passenger train. He whistled cheerfully as he passed. "Beep, beep, beep! Good luck, Rusty!" Rusty smiled happily, as did Mr. Hugh. "I think I'll drive you up myself," he grinned. He was already warming to the diesel. Rusty was honoured and chirped gaily away up the line. The journey went well at first, and Rusty was in high spirits. But as they trundled along, Rusty began to notice how rough the track bed was. "Oh dear," the little diesel thought. "These rails are ever so old. Somebody ought to fix them. I should mention it to Mr. Hugh." But before Rusty could speak, Mr. Hugh called out first. "You're running fine, Rusty," he called, "as smooth as any engine I've driven." That made Rusty very happy indeed. The thought of the rough track bed flew out of the diesel's radiator. "Why, thank you, sir," replied Rusty. "I'm very glad to—" Then there was trouble. With a clank and a loud crunch, a coupling snapped, and the frontmost truck bounced off of the rails. The little diesel felt terrible. "Oh, I am sorry, sir." There was a particular rough section inside the passing loop. Rusty had been so excited the little diesel hadn't taken care. "Never mind," sighed Mr. Hugh. "Could happen to any engine. Though we best get this mess sorted out. "Please," begged Rusty, "let me help. I ought to tidy up my mistakes." Mr. Hugh was pleasantly surprised. "Come along then," he said quickly. So they scampered back down the line, where they collected some workmen and supplies. Before long the party was back at the loop, and the derailed truck was levered back onto solid rails. By the time the job was finished, Peter Sam was coming back down. He took the workmen home with him as Rusty finally continued to the quarry. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hugh," sighed Rusty. "I should have been more careful." "Nonsense," smiled Mr. Hugh. "It was a simple accident. Besides, you did more than enough to make up for it with the recovery." "All these rails need fixing," said Rusty quietly. "I'd be glad to help do it." "Then it's a good thing that's what you're here for," chuckled Mr. Hugh. Rusty's eyes lit up. "Really? I thought I was for odd jobs, sir, but track maintenance sounds much nicer, sir." Mr. Hugh laughed warmly, and soon Rusty joined in. The little diesel was very glad to have a new home, but even happier to have a new purpose. Cheese and Quackers. Donald and Douglas, the Scottish twins, work on Duck's Branch Line by the sea. Many years ago, duck once played a trick on Donald. His driver placed a duckling in his tender. The duckling was named Dilly. She's now fully grown and lives at one of the stations on the line. Hello there, Dilly. Sometimes Dilly lets the engines take her on rides in their cabs, especially Donald, as he is her favourite. But she always likes to return home to her station. Morning, Ryan. Oh, good morning, Douglas. I see it's your turn with the milk tankers today. Aye, I'm taking these empties up to Young Dairy quick. Then I'll be back later with the full ones. Ha ha ha! Daisy won't be so pleased to hear that. We all know how she feels about milk, cows and bulls. Ha 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 ha! You can say that again. Everything okay, sir?
The Fat Controller has asked you to bring in an extra tanker from the dairy. It'll be waiting for you when you arrive.
Neigh Bother, sir.
Excellent. Thank you, Douglas.
Making good time so far this morning. I may have time for a wee drink when we get home. Morning, Dilly. Och, she's no there. Ah, maybe she's at the station.
Hello, Donald.
Good morning, Duck. Have you seen my quackaroo?
Why, no, not today. I thought she might be with you.
No, she is nae, and she's nae at her pond either.
Oh, well, perhaps she's with Douglas. Don't worry, Donald. I'm sure she's fine.
Aye, maybe Dougie has seen her. I hope so anyways. Here, Dougie, have you seen Dilly? Sorry, Donny, I haven't. I thought maybe she'd be with you. No, I think she's lost. I've got to find her. What was that all about? Dilly! Dilly! Are you here, lass? Where are you silly duck?
Well, that's a bit rude. I wonder what Duck did to him this time.
Quackaroo! Dilly! Dilly!
Pardon, but do you mean me?
No, nae you. I'm looking for my duck.
Well, we don't keep ducks at the castle. Have you tried the sea, maybe?
Oh, aye. I'll try the docks.
You're welcome.
Say, Duck, did you see Donny earlier?
Yes, I did. Is something the matter?
Oh, aye. He's worried sick about young Dilly. He can't find the wee lass.
Oh, dear. He did seem worried about her earlier.
Aye, he's very attached to the wee bird. I'll hurry and take me next train, then I'll go and find him, see if he's all right. Meanwhile, Donald was still on the hunt for Dilly. He hurried to Brendam Docks, looking around all the while. But the only bird he could find was Stuart, the seagull. Lost sakes! I've lost me quackaroo! I'll never find Dilly now. She could be anywhere on the island at this rate. Never mind, Donny. I think I have something that'll cheer you up. Really? What's that? Dilly! Me quackaroo! Where did you find her? At the dairy of all places. She must have hopped on me milk train earlier. You silly thing. You had me worried all day about you. Ha 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 ha. I think she wanted an adventure for once, but she's clearly happy to be back with her favourite. Aye, thanks, Dougie. I'm glad to have you and me quackaroo. The twins laughed happily together, whilst Dilly quacked happily in agreement.
James had not pulled passengers in a long while. Sir Topham Hatt had punished him for being lazy and having Henry take his train. The big green engine was now at the works for repairs, leaving James with all his goods work. In James's absence, the service had become so popular extra coaches had been added to the train, making it much longer and heavier to pull. As James topped up on water, he watched as 8 coaches were shunted into the station. "Blimey," muttered the driver. "Gordon would have his work cut out for him pulling that lot." Pah! Who cares? The passenger should be treated to a splendid journey by a splendid engine like me, snorted James rudely as his fireman finished filling up his tender. Lots of the passengers came and crowded the station platform. James felt very jealous as he watched Gordon glide to a stop in front of the coaches. He looked very grand. Hello there, Widow James. Still acting like a goods engine, are you? Oh well, I suppose we can't all pull the express, Gordon grinned. James, from his isolated siding, rolled his eyes, but Gordon didn't care. The conductor's whistle blew, and with a sharp whistle, Gordon snorted away. His wheels slipped as he dragged the heavy coaches out of the station. James was about to set off to arrange his train when he noticed something. There, at the back of the train, was a very tired Percy. "What are you doing back there?" asked James sharply. Percy was still trying to catch his breath. At last, he explained about how he had been helping the express start by pushing it. "It's exhausting. I have to do all the heavy work while Gordon gets all the praise." James started laughing, taking Percy off guard. "Ha! Gordon still needs a push to get started. I'd be humiliated if I need a baggage to push behind my train." James chortled away as Percy let off steam crossly. A few days later, Sir Topham Hatt came to speak to James in the sheds. James looked a little worried. "I've been very impressed with all your hard work of recent, James. Henry will be returning from the work soon, so how would you like to pull the express again?" "Oh, yes, please, sir," whistled James happily. Sir Topham Hatt smiled and tipped his hat to his engine. He turned and stepped into his car. James's crew prepared his fire and set off to the station. He backed onto his coaches, and the passengers boarded the long train. Percy was waiting at the back of the train to help it start, but James was having none of it. "Clear off, little Percy. I don't need a grubby little engine like you spoiling the look of my train." Percy was most offended. He steamed away, muttering under his breath. At last, the conductor blew his whistle, and James responded with a whim, his wheels spinning furiously. "Don't need a back engine, don't need a back engine," he growled, as with one final slip, he got the train into motion, hauling out of the station. Soon James was flying down the line. Now he was moving the train with greater ease, but James had to admit to himself the train was much too heavy for him. "Never mind, I'll do it. Never mind, I'll do it," he puffed to himself. But as he neared Wellsworth, his driver checked his speed and began to put on the brakes. "What's going on?" demanded James. "Why are we stopping?" "We'll need to call for a banker for the hill," called the driver. "Rubbish! I could do it myself," pouted James, but his driver just laughed. "You'll never manage it alone, not with all these coaches." James rode to a stop at the platform, whistling loudly for a banker. Coco had just arrived at the yards and was shunting freight cars when James whistled out. "Don't worry, James," he called. "I'll be with you in a minute." James let off steam indignantly. "Being helped by a diesel! The shame of it! I'd rather have dirty Percy at this point," he groaned. But there was nothing he could do. When Boko was ready, the train started off for the hill, with James still groaning. Now, James is a mixed traffic engine. He can pull coaches and freight cars quite easily. But although he is considered a big engine, he is smaller and weaker than Gordon and Henry. While he can pull heavy trains, like the Express, his one big weakness is screenings. He had a history of struggling on Gordon's hill with the Express before, and had forgotten it. But as he started up the hill with Boko, he suddenly had to admit to himself that he was thankful that Diesel was there. Come on, panted James. We're doing it, called Boko. They were just about to reach the top when, with a loud whistle, Gordon tore down the hill on the other side with a goods train. When he saw James being helped by Boko, he laughed. Ho ho! Feeling the strain, are we, James? he called as he passed. James became very angry, too angry that he began slipping violently on the hill. Boko was very surprised as he now had the weight of the whole train on him. He hooted at James in alarm. "James, correct your slipping! I can't hold the train!" There came a loud snap. The train stalled on the hill as the engine's crew jumped out of the cabs to see what had happened. It didn't take them long to find the problem. James's side rods had broken in half. "Oh, you silly engine! All your slipping damaged your coupler, which caused your side rods to break. You won't be able to take this train any further," scolded the driver. James became flustered and looked shamefaced at his buffers. His driver then spoke to Boko's driver about taking the train on. "I don't think Boko has the pulling power to carry on alone, unless—" Boko's driver had made a plan. Meanwhile, Henry was building up steam in the works. He hadn't suffered much damage and was excited to go home. Then he heard a horn come from the station. He looked over and saw Boko at the head of the express. Boko then moved off the train and headed to the back. "Hello, Boko," called Henry as the diesel rode towards the works. "Who is that you're shunting?" It was James. Boko placed him right next to Henry. James blushed, and Boko winked. "Oh, pay no attention to him, Henry. He's just my back engine. Not an important role after all," teased Boko. Henry chortled as James went redder than ever. Just then, the station master came to see Henry about finishing the express journey. "I'd be more than happy to. It wouldn't be the first time I fill in for James." And the big green engine puffed away. James is now a lot more cautious while taking any train. He is never shy to ask for help from a back engine, and he is a much wiser engine too. One evening, Daisy ambled into the top station. She saw Toby and Terence nearby, enraptured in conversation. "Such a delightful specimen," cheered Terence. Daisy felt flattered. "Why, thank you, my dear." Toby couldn't stifle a laugh. "We weren't talking about you." "No, something better," added Terence, the disdainful look on Daisy's face not deterring his gay chatter. "We are talking about whiskey." "Farmer Wade's new horse," explained Toby. Daisy groaned. "A horse? All this about a horse? What rubbish!" Toby and Terence didn't think whiskey was rubbish, nor did the village people. Next day, Daisy felt her passengers would talk of nothing else. "Fancy getting excited by a daft animal," grunted Daisy. "It's a fine, noble creature," replied her driver. "Not feeling jealous, are we?" murmured Toby at the station by the river. That, of course, made Daisy's temper even fouler. She flounced away with a dramatic fury, but as she made her way down the line, a surprise stood waiting for her. She had barely left the tunnel when she came face to face with Whiskey. "Oh!" she hissed. "Stop!" Luckily, she stopped clear of the stray steed. Daisy had made such a noisy stop that Whiskey had turned and bolted. "Stupid thing must have escaped from his field," grumbled the driver. "I told you it was daft," snapped Daisy. "Best mention this to Farmer Wade," sighed the driver. "Must have broken a fence." They set off again. Daisy, now feeling justified in her disdain for Whiskey. "I said it wasn't worth the fuss," she busted that night. "Fancy making me late. Animals are simply no good to anyone." She had been rambling all night. Thomas and Percy had retired in irritated huffs, but Toby was kept up by Daisy's gloats. "There is nothing wrong with animals," he replied at last. "Besides, I'd hardly expected an engine as capable as you to be severely delayed by such a simple thing." Daisy wisely decided to go to sleep after that. But next morning, once Toby had departed for the junction, she was back on form. "Forget silly horses," she cooed to the passengers. "You should admire a proper sight, like me." The passengers boarded swiftly, and Daisy glided away. The run down the branch went well at first. "Silly thing, no good at all," thought Daisy as she popped out of the tunnel. But as she neared the cutting, she was shocked. Whiskey had wandered free once again, but this new adventure was even more of a disaster. His head was stuck in the fence beside the line. Whiskey was in a dreadful state. "Oh, the poor thing! We must do something to help," cried Daisy, whose demeanor had instantly changed. "We can't leave it here all alone." Daisy made such a fuss, her driver stopped her. A brief inquiry amongst the passengers yielded a vet. Although inexperienced with horses, they led an effort of several passengers, and Daisy's driver to calm poor Whiskey and set him free. The guard had run back to the cinnabox to warn of the delay and to send for Farmer Waite, who was quickly on the scene. "Why, bless you all," he sighed, "I hadn't time to mend my fence yesterday. Old Whiskey seems to like the wide world. Perhaps this may teach him to stay home." "Think nothing of it," said all the passengers involved. "It's Daisy you should think. She insisted that something must be done." "What an extraordinary engine!" cheered Farmer Waite kindly. Daisy blushed brightly. At last, she set off again. The passengers hadn't minded their adventure, despite its delay. When she reached the next station, Daisy found Toby and Terence gossiping. "What delayed you this time?" mused Toby. "A sheep?" The excited wave of passengers quickly filled the two in, both of whom were fully entertained. "Well, well, well," chortled Terence. "Would you ever?" "Look who's like horses after all," chirped Toby. "Oh, pooh!" scoffed Daisy. "This just proves my point. They get in the way and delayed an engine. No good at all. These daft creatures." She flounced away without another word. To this day, Daisy insists her opinions on animals, especially horses, haven't changed. But Toby and Terence think she's only pretending. Don't you?
James was grumbling dreadfully. "It's not fair!" Donald was away at the works, and James felt sure he would be acting relief. "Being forced to work with dirty trucks all day! Disgusting!" The other engines groaned. However, Bear decided to speak up. "I could help do Donald's work if you like, James," he offered kindly. James perked up at once and spent the rest of the evening singing Bear's praises. Next morning an inspector arrived, attending to assign James to Donald's workload. But upon hearing Bear's suggestion, the plans were changed accordingly. "Are you sure about this?" Henry whispered. "Of course," smiled Bear. "Anything's better than hearing James's grievances." Bear was soon at work, which at first he enjoyed, but it wasn't long before he found bother when he ran afoul of a group of particular rowdy tankers. The tankers were new to the region and brought a new-found insight to mischief. They quickly took a dislike to poor Bear, especially his growling engine. "What a racket!" they would screech and jeer. "Awful noise! Ought to be ashamed!" At first, Bear simply ignored them. He had pulled trucks before, and he knew all about their troublesome ways, of course. But the relentless barrage of taunts and insults began to wear down on the poor Diesel. He tried his best to settle them. "Shut up!" he would growl, "or I'll bump you something fierce." But that, unfortunately, only seemed to make them worse. "I don't know what I'm to do," Bear confided to Henry one day. "You shouldn't stand for such nonsense," Henry answered with spirit. "Trucks should know their place." "Bash them around a bit. See that they know who's in charge," James chimed in. However, Bear remained doubtful. "Edward told me you should be firm but fair with trucks. I don't see how being so confrontational would help." Henry and James, however, felt quite sure that they knew better. Poor Bear was left feeling more confused than comforted. One morning, a few days later, Bear was trundling along with a line of empty tankers. They had been quiet all morning, and Bear was beginning to think they were under control. "Being firm but fair clearly is the way," he smiled to himself. But of course, every wise engine knows you cannot truly control trucks. It wasn't long before Bear's driver noticed something. "Oh, crumbs!" she called. "We've run a hot box!" Bear came to a frustrated stop as the tankers cackled. Luckily, they had stopped at a station, though there wasn't another engine in sight. "We'll have to shunt the defect away ourselves," called the driver. The faulty tanker stood third from the front. They were uncoupled, and Bear pulled them away to the sidings. As he did, his engine growled something fierce, much to the delight of the tankers. "Wretched diesel!" they shrieked. "Horrid thing it is! Noisy and clumsy!" Bear was cross. He wanted to follow his friend's advice and bump them around, but he felt it wrong. "Firm but fair," he whispered to himself. "I should be firm, but—" There was a splintering crash. Bear, too absorbed in his thoughts, hadn't taken account the size of the siding he was in. He accidentally smashed the rear tanker into the buffers. He quickly set to work helping tidy his mess until another engine arrived, freeing Bear to return to his train. He felt guilty, but the tankers were quite alarmed. They thought Bear had caused the accident on purpose. They were quiet and obedient for the rest of the day, and some time afterwards. The Fat Controller had been cross with Bear, but the Diesel apologized profusely and promised to be more careful in future. The other engines were impressed with Bear. "You got those daft things to behave after all," congratulated Henry. But Bear wasn't happy. "It's a hollow victory," he sighed. "Stumbling upon the key hardly feels worthy of celebration." Thankfully for the Diesel, his turn with goods work was shortly over. James, rather begrudgingly, took over the extra goods work while Bear returned to pulling coaches. He is a happy engine once again, and between you and me, he rather hopes it will be a long while before he has to pull tankers again.